So I just saw 65, and it was actually really bad. It was very rough. It was very embarrassing. It's maybe one of the worst looking movies I've seen in a while in terms of the cinematography and like the cameras that they used and like the depth of field. It all just felt really off, and like it was everyone's first time holding a camera. And what's really funny about this movie is that a lot of people were really excited for it, or maybe they were all butts, but there were a lot of comments on the trailer and like Reddit, and people were like, "Oh man, I'm so excited that this movie is about dinosaurs and it's not Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park shouldn't have a monopoly on dinosaurs." And everybody's like, "I'm going to see this 9 times in the theater." And then it came out and nobody saw it, and it kind of flopped, which is very amusing to me. The design of the dinosaurs looked so fucking goofy. And you can't know it unless you've seen the movie, because the goofy-looking dinosaurs are not in the trailer. And even though they're most of the movie, the marketing department was pretty smart about what shots they showed in the trailer. They're like, "Oh, T-Rex. T-Rex." But for some reason, all of the other dinosaurs in the movie looked like absolutely bizarre, weird, uncanny valley sort of choices that just, they seemed comical and stupid. And I don't know why. If they're real dinosaurs that exist that are supposed to look like that, cool. But I guess we're just not familiar enough with those ones as audience members. Like, I don't know, maybe we've been brainwashed by Jurassic Park, or maybe they just had really stupid designs for no reason. I don't know why, but they looked goofy as fuck. It's got Adam Driver in it, who has some good roles in other films. I thought he was great in Marriage Story. He's never been that terrible in anything that I've seen him in until now, and boy was he ever terrible. So this movie is written and directed by 2 of the writers from A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place is a movie that was very frustrating to me, particularly because of the writing. The other aspects of A Quiet Place, like generally the directing and generally the acting, the cinematography, like even the creature design, there are admirable qualities to A Quiet Place, but the writing is one of the most frustrating, annoying elements. It really drags down the entire film because every character feels like a prop. Every single scene, every single situation is just like, here's a situation where it would be very difficult to be quiet. Let's just put them in that situation, and it'll be very difficult for them to be quiet. So now you take 2 of the writers from A Quiet Place and you give them their own property without John Krasinski. And my initial reaction to that information was, okay, I'm just going to be annoyed as fuck with this movie. Like, this is going to be another one of those, like, oh, you're putting them in danger and you don't care how they become in danger. The characters are just props. They're not real people. You're not even making an attempt to make them seem like real people. They're just props for the script. And I thought that would be the extent of how I was annoyed by this movie. But holy crap, every element of this film just fails miserably. This isn't like A Quiet Place where it's just the writing holding it back. This is just a terribly made movie from all angles. There was a point where I thought that these 2 writers had never directed anything before, but apparently they've directed like 12 other things. A bunch of shorts, some features, just things that nobody's ever seen, and even the people that have seen them don't seem to have enjoyed them very much. So it really just feels like these 2 were lucky to be associated with A Quiet Place, and that John Krasinski probably just propelled them into making a movie that actually connected with people. There's some sources online that are saying that this film cost $45 million to make, and there's other sources online that are now correcting that and saying, no, it's actually $90 million. I'm not going to go on a hunt to figure out which one of those numbers is correct. It doesn't matter, because the movie feels like it was like a $2 million movie. It looks like shit. I don't know how they did it, but they managed to make what you would assume is a very expensive movie look like one of the cheapest fucking movies ever. It's actually insane just how awful this movie looks. Everything just felt off about this movie. The sets looked terrible. Nothing was shot properly. There's huge chunks of the film where it just feels like we're watching a sci-fi TV movie. It unironically seemed like a fake movie that you would see inside another movie. Like another movie where the characters turn on the TV and there's some shitty movie that's supposed to look fake in the other movie. It's like a movie within a movie. It doesn't feel like a real movie. It feels like a fake movie. Getting back to Adam Driver, he genuinely sucked in this movie. He was genuinely awful. There's some really unintentionally hilarious moments from his performance. Like, I think right after he falls out of a tree, he's grunting and he's going like, like the grape lady or something. Stop. It was very funny. There are some very funny, clip-worthy moments from this film, and I hope to see those on YouTube at some point. From watching the trailer, it was abundantly clear that the young child actor was going to be pretty annoying, and she was. Basically, she's the only other survivor on this ship that Adam Driver was Adam driving. She doesn't speak English because she's from a different part of another colony or something. Even though the ship only had like what seemed like 20 people on it, it wasn't really clear what the whole point of the ship was. She's the only other survivor and she doesn't speak English, so they have this dynamic where he's trying to explain things to her and she doesn't understand, but sometimes he tries to explain things to her and she understands perfectly. She understands absolutely perfectly when it's convenient for the scripts, and she doesn't understand when it's convenient for the script, and they just kind of make things up as they go along with no consistency, and they just, it's the writers of A Quiet Place. It's obviously what they were going to do. And despite her not really having any real conversations with Adam Driver or not saying any English words, I think that the language she was speaking was made up, she was still very annoying. The overwhelming majority of her dialogue seemed to be just her screaming, and it didn't feel like a real scream. It felt like you got a young child actor to scream, and that's what she did, but it didn't feel like a real child screaming, like actually in danger. It was just a really annoying... It was like pressing a fucking button, It was like, eh! It was like a squeaky toy. It wasn't like someone who felt like they were in danger. It was like you press the scream button and she just made a really annoying sound. Eh! It was just... That was a lot of it, and that's what she was there to do. And you want Adam Driver's character to have something to have to protect, because then he's a more relatable character, because he has a protection instinct. He's protecting the small thing. Honestly, can we replace all child actors with AI? I think it would work out better. And also be a lot more ethical, because even if a child actor is good, and especially if they're good, because then they become stars, there's the whole, destroying their life element and being exploited element that maybe we just probably shouldn't be encouraging that. The movie also had no hook. Watching these two interact with each other, there just wasn't anything to it. Like, there was nothing about the movie to get you sucked in or invested at any moment throughout the entire experience. It was kind of just like, oh, we're watching these two act poorly, and they're just dicking around, and there's dinosaurs, I guess. But there was no hook. There was nothing to get invested in. Their chemistry was nothing. It didn't seem like they cared about each other that much, like the movie was insisting that they did, but there was really nothing to it. And that is one of the biggest issues with the movie, is that there's just like absolutely nothing interesting about the entire experience. You're kind of just watching it feeling obligated because you bought a ticket to the movie, I guess we're going into spoiler territory, so I can talk about a couple specific things that were very stupid in the movie. You can skip to the next chapter of this video if you don't want the spoilers. The plot is that 65 million years ago, human beings existed, evolution doesn't real, and English is a language that existed literally before all recorded civilization. Adam Driver was running around speaking English. They didn't take a time machine. At no point did they imply that there was like a time machine element. It's just like, oh no, humans were just running around space, just doing shit. Just, Mr. Adam Driver's just speaking English, and that was just a thing. We've destroyed both the Bible and evolution, so checkmate, everyone. Humanity has existed 65 million years ago for no reason, and he crash lands on Earth because of, what did he say? Like an unlogged asteroid belt? Oh, like an asteroid hit my ship. He crash lands on Earth and he starts recording a message. He's like, okay, this is a distress signal. You need to help. The air is breathable, but I'm stuck here. And then you see him recording another one being like, actually, no, don't bother come helping me. No one's alive. And then it cuts to him in his mouth going like, ah! And it's like, that was quick. Like, why? It didn't feel like a justified decision, and it was just kind of comical. Like, we're just adding some drama. Like, oh no, he's now feels like he's Minecraftable. He's going to start crafting. No. And then he decides like, oh, I'm going to check to see if anyone else is alive. I'm going to check to find the girl. So he finds the girl, and then they just dick around for most of the movie, and he sees that there's like a part of the ship that they can use to fly off the planet, and it's just glimmering in the distance on the top of a mountain. And so the premise of the film is, oh, we got to get to the top of the mountain. We're going on an adventure. We're going on a trip. At the beginning of the film, there's a little tiny sequence of these geysers, boiling water pressure underneath some dirt or whatever, however it works. Basically, he almost gets burned by it, and so he learns of the geyser's existence. And I'm like, okay, well, that scene is obviously there so that it can be used at the end of the film in the exact same way that, Prey has the mud part. Like, okay, you're literally just showing us that so that the main character can use it against whatever is chasing them at the end. Duh, obviously. And then they introduce the whole, oh, we're going up the mountain. I'm like, okay, well, maybe that won't happen because they're going far away from where the geyser is. They get to the top of the mountain, they get in the ship, and it falls like half a second. And then it seems like they're all the way back down at the bottom of the mountain because he gets chased by T-Rexes, and then he uses the geyser against the T-Rex, which is what I assumed would happen at the beginning of the movie. But based on how they did the movie, I was like, okay, well, surely that's not going to happen. But then they just did it anyway. It was like, oh, okay, wow. And the first time it happens, it does literally nothing. And it's like, oh, I guess it doesn't work. And then the second time, it like melts its skin off. And it's just like, okay, it just needed the second time. Also, the second time it happens, the little girl is like right underneath it. So she should be dead. She should be dead, but she's fine. And it just decided not to show her. It was just like, okay, we're going to pretend like she's okay. Apparently, you're not supposed to care about the little girl enough to know where she is at that moment. There's a part in the movie where the way that they shot it, it was like, it was supposed to be really cool, but it seemed like it was just trying to be really cheap. So Adam Driver's like in a cave, and there's like a dinosaur, like maybe a raptor or something, that attacks him. But instead of showing him fight the raptor, he drops his hologram device that I guess just displays a 3D image of the environment right on top of itself, and it turns on by accident, and the camera shows the hologram device. And so we see, instead of seeing the real fight, we see a really simplified 3D animation version of it. And it's like, oh, it's coming from this cheap hologram thing. And it seemed like it was supposed to look cool, but it just looked cheap. It was like, oh wow, I guess you didn't have to render any detail in that scene. I guess you can just have a low poly version of this scene instead of just showing it. And that was such a weird, bizarre choice. And so then I don't know if it's a different hologram device, but it works as a save the day plot device at the end. Just a convenient thing for the little girl to save him. So he's trapped by two T-Rexes, and for some reason his gun stops working, and it's not clear why his gun isn't working, because all he does is he presses some buttons on it and then it works fine again. I was like, is he out of ammo? No, apparently he wasn't out of ammo. He just had to like press some buttons on the side, and then his gun's working again. Anyway, he's trapped. Adam Driver is like 50 feet away at least from the ship, like 100 feet away maybe, I don't know. A very long distance away from the ship, dealing with the two T-Rexes. And the little girl manages to project an image from this little box device from inside the ship through the window onto the ground where Adam Driver is. So she has like perfect distance control over this holographic device that she's never used before and figured it out instantly to save the day for him. And it was just one of those like, come on, like what is this? And it, obviously the hologram that was being shown was like, oh, my real daughter, who I don't remember. Did she die or something? Or is he just going back? Yeah, I think she died. I don't remember. He had a real daughter in the opening of the movie. It was so stupid. The entire movie was just so cheap creatively and cheap looking production value wise. Somehow, even though they clearly spent a lot of money on it, it looked like the cheapest piece of shit ever. These two should not be directing movies ever. Scott Beck and Brian Woods, you really did it. You really fucked everything up. You made Adam Driver look the worst he's ever looked. You made him act the worst he's ever acted. It's a really rough movie. It is a movie that no matter what you watch after this movie, it's gonna seem like a fucking masterpiece, you know? The overwhelming majority of things you could watch after this movie, you could be like, I really didn't consider how little I was appreciating competently shot movies. Sometimes you don't even notice when something is just competently shot. When something's just like all right and you've done the basics in terms of communicating something visually. Sometimes you just forget about it and you don't appreciate it as much. If you watch 65 and then you watch like any random average movie in theaters right after, you'll be like, damn, there's some good filmmaking in here. You'll appreciate cinema again. Watch 65 if only to appreciate whatever the fuck you watch after 65. It's a horrendous movie. It was an hour and a half long. It felt like 3 hours. Somehow, it felt so long. They accomplished nothing. It was stupid. Oh yeah, and the reason why they had to get off the planet at the end was because the asteroids were coming that are gonna wipe out the dinosaurs. He got like a little notification on a device that was like, oh, asteroids are headed to Earth. So he showed up on the planet like 12 hours before the mass extinction event is gonna happen. So then there was like this time limit, and then a tiny piece of asteroid comes and fucks up their ability to take off the first time. You know, the tiny piece of asteroid is just not big enough to kill them. The tiny bits hit first and gave them enough time to escape. It was just caused a little bit of conflict. And yeah, wow, what a dumb movie. What a stupid movie. They just didn't do anything with it. It was a gigantic piece of shit. And I'm giving this one a 2 out of 10. It was very uniquely bad. It was incompetent. It was embarrassing. It was one of the roughest movies you could possibly watch in a theater. It's incredibly bad. Why not a 1? Why don't you shut the fuck up? I then saw Shazam! Fury of the Gods, directed by David F. Sandberg. I enjoyed the first Shazam quite a lot, because it felt reminiscent of kind of like Sam Raimi superhero. It didn't take itself way too seriously. I thought that the dynamic of the characters was fun to watch and interesting. I thought that Zachary Levi captured the young child in an adult body performance pretty well. I thought that was pretty entertaining. And there's a lot of elements from the first film that still carry over into this one that I still enjoy. This film is definitely not as strong as the first, and that seems to be like pretty unanimously agreed upon by everybody. But I didn't hate it, and a lot of people are clowning on this movie, and a lot of people are kind of just shitting on it. But I really did not hate it at all. I was actually, I had a positive experience with this movie. I will say that I'm not into the DC universe. I'm not into Marvel movies either. This isn't the genre that I find myself getting excited over and being like, oh yeah, I don't give a shit about what happens to the characters by the end of the movie. Not in any particular way. I'm not attached to these pre-existing superhero characters. I don't feel validated by seeing them appear in a movie. I wouldn't even know about Shazam before the movie. I don't care. I'm here to watch filmmaking. I'm here to watch acting. I'm here to watch some sort of combination of filmmaking elements that provide some sort of emotional experience. Maybe just have a little fun. That's what I'm here to do. And I had some fun. This was a generally fun movie. Sure, there were some elements of it where I was like, okay, that's kind of dumb. And if we're being perfectly honest, the story wasn't really something that I was super invested in. At any point, I was kind of just watching the characters and watching the action set pieces or watching any individual scene or comedic moments or just set pieces in general. And perhaps maybe part of my experience was that we watched it directly after the movie 65. But there's some good camera work and filmmaking in this movie, you know, like especially after watching the movie 65, I'm like, damn, you know, there's some motivation in here. It actually feels like there's a voice behind the camera. It also felt relatively consistent with other David F. Sandberg films. It not only stood out in terms of like, oh yeah, we just watched 65, but it also stood out in terms of the overwhelming majority of superhero Marvel films that I've seen. There's something about how the camera moved in any given scene where I could still feel the person. I could still feel the director. And that's more or less what I'm looking for when I experience a movie is I want to feel the voice of the film. I want it to be a window into the person that created it. And sure, this isn't like a Charlie Kaufman movie, you know. This is a studio superhero film. There's many cogs in the machine, and it is quite the machine. There's many things that are completely out of David F. Sandberg's control. Nobody has complete full control over what this movie turns out to be because there's so many people working on it, and there's so many different factors that go into making a superhero movie. So many different strings pulling in either direction. And so it was kind of interesting watching this movie because I did feel as though there was some sort of like pushing and pulling being done just watching the film itself without really even looking up anything online. It was pretty apparent that there were some conflicting ideas of what the film was. You can tell that there's a difference between how it's shot and how it's edited at points. There are some points where the editing is like, okay, wow, that cut was like way too quick. That didn't make any sense. But it didn't feel like it was ever because of how it was shot. It didn't really feel like, oh, that cut was necessary because they didn't have enough footage. It just felt like there was not that much of a cohesive bond between the editor of that scene and the voice of the film. It felt like there's just too many people working almost independently of each other on different elements at points. Part of the reason why I had fun watching this movie is because, like the first film, for the most part, it doesn't take itself too seriously. Sure, there are serious elements in this film. There are parts of making a superhero movie that almost just feel like obligatory or necessary if you're going to stay in the genre of superhero movie or, you know, stay in the DC universe or whatever we want to call it. There are serious moments, and I would argue that the last 15 minutes of the film is way too serious. Like that's probably the worst part of the movie. Is the whole climax of the movie just kind of felt like mindless CG nonsense. But overall, it didn't feel like it was pretentious. It didn't feel like it was trying to elicit emotions or ideas that were much more complex than they actually are. But despite not feeling pretentious, it also didn't feel lazy or phoned in. A lot of superhero movies that I wind up watching, it really just feels like the director didn't give a shit about anything. But watching this film, it's clear just by watching the movie that there is some thought and care put into parts of the movie. There is someone trying to make a good product, someone trying to make a good experience with the movie. It's definitely not phoned in. I also enjoyed the humor in this film for the most part. There are some parts in the movie where I had genuine laughs, and that's more than I could say about the overwhelming majority of superhero movies. I've had some genuine laughs watching some other DC movies that were unintentional, that were in scenes that I was not supposed to be laughing, whereas I did gel with the humor in this movie for the most part. Sure, there are parts in this film where they attempt jokes that just don't work, but for the most part, it worked for me. I enjoyed the experience of the film. I guess one of my bigger criticisms in this film is that it doesn't really flesh out the characters, and it doesn't really feel like it has much of an opportunity to. It stays focused on a couple different characters, and it kind of fleshes them out. It kind of explores them, but not really. And then there's this huge ensemble. Like, there's this gigantic cast of main characters that we just don't really spend any time with, and we don't really develop or learn anything about, and they're just kind of there. And there's no real reason why the cast of characters needs to be that big. They're just not properly utilized. The acting was good. I enjoyed the performances. The only performance that I didn't like was from the youngest sister character. And I don't even think she necessarily did a bad job, but she looks way too much like an actor. And her screen presence just kind of screams like, I'm a model or something. It just feels like you're looking at a rich person or a celebrity or something. It doesn't feel like a character in the film. It just took me out of it. I don't know how much of that has to do with her performance, but there's just something about her screen presence was just like, oh, you're an actor. You're definitely an actor. Like, you could be on like a Disney Channel show or something. Like, you could be like a Disney kid. That's what it felt like. But yeah, I mean, the performance wasn't terrible. It's just like something about the screen presence just was not convincing. Otherwise, all the acting was good. Lucy Liu was good. She was a nice surprise in the movie. Again, very refreshing after watching the movie 65. But it is still like a cut above most superhero movies in terms of how it's shot. There's something about it where I can feel the voice there, and it's cutting through the bullshit. It's cutting through the bureaucratic machine of superhero movies, and I'm like, oh, there's a voice there. It feels like there's a voice there. There are also some sequences in this film that do feel like they are showcasing David F. Sandberg's skills as a horror director. There are some moments and sequences in this film that are like, oh wow, yeah, like that feels kind of creepy, or that feels kind of scary, that, you know, where it does feel kind of like a horror movie at points. Not as much as the first Shazam. There were definitely some more brutal elements of the first Shazam, but there are some effective horror-esque moments in this film, and I appreciated that. It's also pretty impressive that this movie is over 2 hours long, and it didn't really feel like it dragged on, except for maybe the last 15 minutes where it just turned into a bunch of CG nonsense. I kind of just zoned out at the end, but we were already so close to the end that I was like, whatever, you know. It felt less long than 65, despite it being 40 minutes longer. This felt like a shorter film than 65. And even with this film being over 2 hours, I think part of the reason why it didn't feel way too long when I watched it is because they didn't spend way too long on any given scene. It always kind of moved along to a new environment, a new location. There are elements of this film that could have been really gratuitously played out. There's the gag with the, let's just call it Taste the Rainbow, if we don't want to get into spoiler territory. Let's just get into spoiler territory. All right, let's get into spoiler territory just because there's a couple things that happen that I want to talk about that are, I guess, spoilers. There's like a part where they do the whole like, oh, the unicorns. Then they ride around on unicorns and there's like Skittles. They say the Skittle gag out loud twice. I think that was one too many times. But in terms of the whole sequence, it knew that it was a gag and it kind of just moved on. Fucking Wonder Woman was in the movie and the movie spoiled that in the marketing. And I never watched that most recent marketing where they were just like, oh yeah, we're just going to say that she's in the movie. But that's kind of a shitty thing to do because that was just so obviously in the movie as a surprise, and then they ruined it with the marketing. I'm glad I didn't see that marketing. I don't really care about Wonder Woman. I didn't watch the Wonder Woman movies, obviously because I'm sexist. It's absolutely bizarre how they decided to market this movie, and also DC saying that they're restructuring everything and that they're like redoing everything. It's a weird situation for this movie to exist in, and it feels like it can't possibly just exist on its own. It's really unfortunate because it feels like this movie could have just been its own thing, but because of all of these external pressures about the whole DC universe and like, oh, how do we get our money back and blah, 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 like all these weird factors that are just trying to pressure this movie into not existing as just its own natural thing is kind of disappointing. And you can tell that it's happening just watching the film. You can tell that it's there. But I will still say that I enjoyed my experience watching this movie overall. Not super invested in the drama of the plot, but I didn't feel like I needed to be. The voice shines through the bullshit. I was watching a well-directed movie for the most part. Everybody's shitting on it, but I guess just keep in mind that a lot of the reasons that a lot of people watch this genre of films for is not what I'm looking for in a movie anyway. I'm not a fan of superhero movies anyway, so use that as like a test to whether or not you're going to enjoy it. If you find yourself soying over superhero things generally, then maybe you won't like this one as much, because that just seems to be the general consensus. But for me personally, in the sea of superhero movies, and especially like Warner Brothers ones, especially the fucking DC universe that we have going on right now, this feels pretty good. You know, this is not nearly as annoying as so many other superhero movies that I've seen, and it's weird that everybody's shitting on it. To me, I understand it to a certain degree, just in terms of like what people are wanting to get out of their experiences versus what I'm wanting to get out of my experiences. It feels like people are entering an actual era of superhero fatigue, and this just happens to be in an unfortunate position in terms of when it was released and how it was released and the conversation around its release, and then also just, you know, the interference affecting the actual film itself to a certain degree. So it's unfortunate. I enjoyed the experience. I enjoyed the movie. Low 6 out of 10. 6 out of 10, closer to a 5 than a 7. It's just so much more competent than so many other superhero movies. Despite there being bullshit, the voice still shines through. Thank you very much.